A billionaire CEO humiliated a single dad mechanic on her luxury cruise. Then the captain recognized his mettle. The first engine died at 11:47 p.m. The second began overheating 30 seconds later. At first, the guests aboard the Celestia noticed only the music. The orchestra slowed. A violin note bent strangely beneath the crystal ceiling. Champagne trembled inside narrow glasses. Then the floor tilted. Not enough to throw anyone down. Just enough to make 300 wealthy passengers stop pretending they were not afraid. Outside the glass walls of the observation ballroom, the Atlantic had disappeared beneath rain. Black water climbed against the windows in violent sheets. Lightning opened the sky for a fraction of a second and revealed waves taller than the lower decks. The Celestia had been advertised as the safest luxury vessel ever built. $2 billion of polished steel, imported marble, private suites, and intelligent navigation systems. Now it was drifting sideways toward a line of submerged rock. No music remained. No one was smiling. At the center of the ballroom stood Isabella Vale, billionaire CEO of Vale Oceanic, still wearing the silver gown chosen for the ship's inaugural voyage. Less than 20 minutes earlier, she had ordered a mechanic and his young daughter removed from the VIP deck. Now that mechanic stood before the emergency access door while every senior officer on the ship waited for him to speak. His name was Ethan Cole. Oil darkened the front of his work uniform. A broken security badge hung from one pocket. His left wrist was bruised where two guards had tried to restrain him. Beside him stood his 8-year-old daughter, Lucy. She held a small wooden whale with one missing fin. Her face was pale. Her eyes never left her father. Isabella stared at Ethan as though the room had betrayed her. Only minutes ago she had called him an embarrassment, a worker who had forgotten his place, a careless father who should never have brought a child aboard her ship. Then Captain Robert Kane had seen the metal beneath Ethan's collar. The captain's reaction changed everything. Robert had crossed the ballroom slowly, his face losing color with every step. He had looked at the faded ribbon, then at the scar across Ethan's forearm. 15 years of memory returned all at once. Cold water, a sinking hull, a rescue diver cutting through twisted steel while everyone else believed that the trapped men were already dead. Robert stopped directly in front of the mechanic. The room heard him address Ethan by a title no one expected. Commander Cole. Now, as alarms spread through the ship, the same captain stood beside him waiting for instructions. Ethan looked toward the storm beyond the glass. He did not appear surprised. That frightened Robert more than the alarms. Ethan had already known something was wrong. He had known hours earlier. He had written reports. He had warned the engineering office. Someone had deleted every warning. A violent shudder moved through the hull. Several passengers screamed. The emergency lights switched from white to red. A voice from the bridge arrived through Robert's radio. The remaining engine had 4 minutes before automatic shutdown. After that, the Celestia would have no propulsion, no control, nothing to keep her bow facing the waves. Ethan lowered himself in front of Lucy. He adjusted her life jacket, tightened the strap beneath her chin, and placed both hands on her shoulders. His movements were slow, careful. The same hands that had once dragged men from freezing water were now trying to convince one frightened child that her father would return. Lucy understood more than he wanted her to. She looked past him toward the lower deck access door. She knew that was where he was going. Ethan touched the broken wooden whale in her hands. It had belonged to her mother. He closed Lucy's fingers around it. Then he stood. Robert asked what he needed. Ethan looked toward the emergency map. One engine gone, the second close to seizure. Cooling pressure collapsing. A storm pushing 2,000 people toward a reef. His answer was quiet. He needed access to the engine room. He needed the fire suppression pumps disconnected from automatic control. And he needed everyone on the bridge to obey without asking why. Isabella stepped toward him. For the first time that evening, her voice carried no authority. Only fear. Can you save the ship? Ian. Ethan looked at her. The woman who had publicly humiliated his daughter. The woman who had crushed Lucy's last gift from her mother beneath an expensive shoe. The woman whose company had ignored his warnings because delay was bad for business. He did not answer her question. He turned to Robert. Keep the bow into the waves as long as you can. Then he entered the lower deck. The steel door closed behind him, and the ship moved closer to the rocks. That morning had begun under a clear sky. Lucy stood at the edge of Pier 9 with both hands wrapped around the railing, staring up at the Celestia as though it were a floating city. The ship rose above the harbor in layers of white steel and glass. Private balconies lined the upper decks. A swimming pool stretched beneath a retractable roof. Near the bow, a silver emblem formed the letter V inside a circle. Vale Oceanic had placed the same symbol on every ticket, uniform, champagne bottle, and television advertisement connected to the launch. The Celestia was not merely a ship, it was a statement. Lucy had never seen anything so large. She asked how something that heavy stayed above water. Ethan adjusted the strap of his tool bag and gave her the simplest answer he could. The ship pushed away exactly as much water as it weighed. Lucy looked at the vessel again. She was not convinced. At 8 years old, she trusted stories more than physics. The wooden whale in her hand made more sense to her than displacement. Her mother had carved it from a piece of cedar during the final summer of her life. Anna Cole had worked as an oceanographer before illness reduced her world to hospital windows and photographs of places she could no longer visit. She had given Lucy the whale with 2 uneven fins and a crooked tail. It was not beautiful. It was important. After Anna died, Lucy carried it everywhere. Ethan had repaired it 6 times. The 7th repair had not yet become necessary. That would change before the night was over. Ethan had accepted a 3-week contract aboard the Celestia because the pay was better than anything available at the small marine repair yard where he usually worked. The yard paid enough for rent, groceries, and Lucy's school supplies. It did not pay enough to replace the leaking roof of their house. It did not pay enough to build the bedroom Lucy kept drawing on scraps of paper. 3 weeks at sea could solve both problems. Then the woman who had promised to care for Lucy became ill on the morning of departure. The ship was scheduled to leave in 4 hours. Ethan had no family nearby, no one he trusted enough to leave Lucy with for 3 weeks. He called the engineering supervisor and prepared to lose the job. Instead, the supervisor told him to bring her. There was a spare staff cabin near the auxiliary engineering office. Lucy could remain there during shifts. The voyage included families. No one would notice one more child if she stayed below the passenger decks. Ethan should have recognized the warning hidden inside those words. No one would notice. He had spent much of his life learning that people noticed only what threatened their comfort. When father and daughter crossed the crew entrance, no photographer turned toward them. Workers loaded flowers, food, and expensive luggage onto the ship. Musicians carried instrument cases toward the ballroom. Event coordinators moved through the terminal wearing headsets and expressions of permanent emergency. Ethan and Lucy passed through security without attention. His employment file identified him as a temporary propulsion technician. It did not mention his former rank. It did not mention the medals stored inside a metal box at home. It did not mention North Atlantic Rescue Command. Ethan had removed that part of his life from every form that did not legally require it. To most people, he was a 43-year-old mechanic with a tired face and a daughter he loved too carefully. That was enough. They reached the staff cabin before noon. It contained 2 narrow beds, a metal desk, and a round window overlooking the waterline. Lucy placed her backpack on the lower bed and immediately covered the wall above it with drawings. Whales, lighthouses, a house with a blue roof. 3 figures standing near the sea. 1 figure had wings. Ethan did not ask which one represented Anna. He already knew. Before leaving for his first inspection, he showed Lucy the emergency phone, the life jacket compartment, and the route to the crew assembly station. He repeated the instructions twice. Lucy listened with exaggerated patience. She had heard versions of the same instructions in hotels, train stations, shopping centers, and public parks. Ethan always knew where the exits were. He always noticed fire alarms. He always sat where he could see the door. Anna once told him that he had returned from the sea physically, but part of him remained inside every storm he survived. Ethan had not argued. Old habits did not disappear because a man became a father. They simply found smaller lives to protect. Lucy promised to remain in the cockpit. Ethan promised to return for lunch. Both intended to keep those promises. Only one would succeed. The lower engineering deck smelled of hot metal, salt, and industrial lubricant. That smell calmed Ethan. Machines were honest. A damaged bearing did not flatter investors. A cracked valve did not hide behind public relations language. Machines failed for reasons. Find the reason, and the truth usually followed. The Celestia's engine room was enormous. 2 primary marine turbines occupied the central compartment, surrounded by cooling lines, control modules, and inspection platforms. Every surface looked new. That was the first thing Ethan distrusted. New machinery usually carried small marks from installation. Scratched bolts, test grease, alignment paint. Several of the cooling assemblies appeared strangely clean, while the metal beneath them showed older wear. The parts had not been installed with the ship. They had been removed from somewhere else and repainted. Ethan climbed onto the second inspection platform and checked the serial number on a pressure valve. The maintenance record identified it as a newly manufactured Vail-certified component. The stamped number told a different story. It was 7 years old, rated for a smaller vessel, unable to tolerate the sustained pressure of the Celestia's main cooling loop. He found 3 more, then 6. By the time Ethan reached the aft circulation system, the pattern was undeniable. Someone had replaced certified components with refurbished parts. The ship looked new. Its most important internal system was not. Ethan recorded every serial number and photographed each assembly. He wrote a report through the crew maintenance network. The report included one recommendation: delay departure until a complete pressure inspection could be performed. He marked the issue critical. 10 minutes later, the chief engineering officer appeared on the platform. Martin Shaw was a narrow man with a neatly trimmed beard and an expression permanently caught between irritation and calculation. He did not examine the valves. He looked only at Ethan. Martin reminded him that the Celestia would depart before sunset. Investors had flown from 11 countries. International media were already aboard. A delay would cost millions. Ethan explained that a ship did not care what delay cost. A cooling system under pressure would either hold or fail. Martin dismissed the concern as excessive caution from a temporary contractor unfamiliar with the vessel. Ethan showed him the serial numbers. For a moment, Martin's face changed. It was small, a tightening near the mouth, a glance toward the nearest security camera. Then the expression disappeared. Martin ordered him to complete routine inspection and avoid creating unnecessary reports. Ethan watched him leave. That was when concern became suspicion. A careless officer would have argued about the technical details. Martin had not argued. He already knew. Ethan returned to the terminal and attempted to reopen his report. The document no longer existed. He submitted another. That report disappeared as well. His maintenance account was disabled before the ship left harbor. At 3:18 p.m., the Celestia's lines were released. Guests gathered along the upper decks. Champagne appeared. Music rose across the harbor. The ship moved away beneath a cloudless sky while the cooling system carried 6 valves never designed to survive the voyage. Ethan stood inside the engine room listening to the turbines increase power. For most people, the sound would have seemed strong. To Ethan, it sounded like a promise made by someone who intended to break it. Isabella Vale arrived by helicopter 20 minutes after departure. The aircraft descended onto the forward landing platform while cameras waited. She stepped onto the ship wearing a white suit and dark glasses, followed by assistants carrying tablets, garment bags, and a silver case containing jewelry for the evening. At 39, Isabella controlled one of the largest private maritime companies in the world. Her grandfather had built cargo ships. Her father had expanded into commercial transport. Isabella transformed the family business into a luxury empire. She understood image better than navigation. She could identify the exact photograph that would move a stock price. She knew which charity created the most favorable headlines. She knew how long to stand beside an employee before appearing approachable instead of delayed. Business publications called her visionary. Former employees used words they never printed. The Celestia was her greatest project. The first ship in a planned fleet that would compete not with other cruise lines but with private resorts. Its launch had already increased Vail Oceanic's valuation. A delay would have weakened confidence. A canceled voyage would have humiliated her in front of the same investors she had promised perfection. That afternoon, Isabella inspected the ship with Marcus Shaw, the company's chief financial officer and Martin's older brother. Marcus had managed the Celestia's construction budget. He had also approved the purchase of the refurbished valves through a subcontracting company that existed only on paper. The savings had been transferred into consulting accounts controlled by men loyal to him. Isabella did not know every detail. She knew costs had been reduced. She knew deadlines had been met. She knew several engineers had resigned during construction. She had never asked why. Results were more comfortable than explanations. Her tour stopped near the lower deck elevator when Ethan attempted to approach. His uniform was marked with oil. His access card no longer worked. He carried printed photographs because the digital reports had vanished. An assistant stepped between them before Ethan came within 10 feet. Isabella glanced at him only once. She saw a mechanic, not a warning. The assistant informed her that a temporary worker had raised an unverified concern about components already approved by engineering management. Marcus spoke before Ethan could explain. He described the issue as a documentation mismatch created by outdated inventory software. Isabella asked one question. Would it affect the gala? Marcus said no. She continued the tour. Ethan remained in the corridor holding photographs no one wanted to see. On the upper deck, reporters photographed Isabella beside a wall of windows while the sun descended over the Atlantic. Below them, cooling pressure began to rise. Lucy kept herself busy for nearly 4 hours. She drew the Celestia from memory. She ate the sandwich Ethan packed. She watched the ocean move past the round window. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. The wooden whale slipped from her lap. Lucy picked it up and pressed it to her chest. She disliked storms. She disliked dark rooms. Most of all, she disliked the way adults changed their voices when they were afraid but did not want children to know. At 6:40 p.m., she used the emergency phone to call the engineering office. No one answered. She waited. Ethan had promised lunch. Lunch became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. Lucy knew her father never forgot her. That meant something had prevented him from returning. She left the cabin. The corridor outside was empty. A low mechanical alarm sounded behind one of the walls. It stopped after several seconds, then started again. Lucy followed it. The ship's service corridors formed a confusing network of gray doors and narrow staircases. She passed storage rooms, laundry carts, and kitchen workers preparing silver trays. No one stopped her until she reached the glass corridor leading toward the observation ballroom. Beyond the doors, the ship had become another world. Hundreds of lights reflected against the ceiling. Women wore gowns that touched the floor. Men carried champagne and spoke beside models of future Vale ships. A string orchestra played near the windows. Lucy stood at the edge of it all in a yellow sweater and worn blue shoes. She looked like a small piece of daylight that had wandered into the wrong night. A server noticed her first. He asked whether she was lost. Lucy said she was looking for her father. Before he could help, Isabella's event coordinator saw them. The coordinator had spent the last 6 hours removing every object that did not match the evening's design. A maintenance worker's child matched nothing. She called security. Lucy backed toward the door. The wooden whale slipped from her hands and landed on the polished floor. It slid several feet, stopped near Isabella Vale. Isabella was speaking with a group of investors beneath a display reading "The Future of Ocean Travel." She looked down. The whale rested beside her silver shoe. Lucy hurried forward. At the same moment, a photographer called Isabella's name. She stepped back to turn toward the camera. Her heel came down on the wooden whale. The small cedar fin snapped. Lucy stopped. The sound was quiet. To her, it was louder than the orchestra. The photographer captured Isabella's smile before she looked down. Lucy stared at the broken piece near her shoe. Her face changed slowly. First confusion, then disbelief, then the kind of grief children experience when an object carries someone they have already lost. Ethan entered the ballroom as Lucy began to cry. He had spent the previous hour tracing the deleted maintenance reports through a backup terminal. He found her cabin empty and followed the staff alarm to the upper deck. When he saw her standing near Isabella, he crossed the room without running. Old training had taught him that panic spread faster when people saw it. He reached Lucy, knelt, and gathered the 2 pieces of the whale. She tried to explain. He did not need the explanation. He saw Isabella's shoe, the event coordinator, the guards, the faces of people watching as though a child's pain were another form of entertainment. Ethan placed the broken whale in his pocket and checked Lucy for injury. Only then did he look at Isabella. She recognized him as the mechanic from the corridor. Her annoyance sharpened. The launch speech was scheduled in 4 minutes. Reporters were watching. One of her largest investors had already asked why a crew member's child was inside the VIP area. Isabella demanded to know why Ethan had brought a child onto the ship. Ethan explained that the engineering supervisor had approved the arrangement. She asked why Lucy had been allowed to wander. Ethan did not offer an excuse. He accepted responsibility for leaving her alone longer than promised. That answer should have ended the confrontation. It did not. People who live without consequences often mistake humility for permission. Isabella described Lucy's presence as a disruption. She spoke about safety estards, professionalism, and the expectations of paying guests. Her words were measured. Their meaning was not. Lucy heard herself described as something that needed to be hidden. Ethan remained quiet until Isabella suggested that a responsible father would have chosen childcare over bringing his personal difficulties into her company. The orchestra had stopped playing. The nearest guest turned fully toward them. Ethan stood. He was not an especially large man, but stillness gave him a kind of weight. He told Isabella they would return below deck. He also told her the ship needed to reduce speed and inspect the cooling system immediately. The shift from family embarrassment to mechanical warning unsettled the crowd. Isabella looked toward Marcus. Marcus smiled. The smile was meant to reassure her. It reassured Ethan of the opposite. Marcus announced that the system had passed inspection and accused Ethan of repeating a disproven concern after his access privileges were removed. The investors relaxed. Isabella did not want truth. She wanted the room to return to the version of itself she controlled. She ordered security to escort Ethan and Lucy away. Ethan took Lucy's hand. They turned toward the door. Then Isabella added that both would be removed from the ship at the next port, and Ethan's contract would be terminated. Lucy looked up at her father. The house roof. Her new bedroom. 3 weeks of pay. All of it disappeared behind her eyes. Ethan saw the guilt forming. That was the line Isabella should not have crossed. Children often believe their existence caused adult problems. Ethan would not allow that belief to grow inside his daughter. He turned back. His voice remained low. He said the contract was not Lucy's responsibility. He said the broken whale was not the important part. He said the important part was that an adult had seen a frightened child and chosen humiliation because cameras were watching. The ballroom became very still. Isabella's face tightened. The statement had stripped away the language of policy and revealed the smaller truth beneath it. She felt the crowd judging her. Power did not tolerate that feeling well. She demanded Ethan's identification. He handed her the temporary badge. Isabella looked at it, then at him. The badge contained no title that impressed her. She dropped it onto the floor. Security moved closer. Lucy pressed against Ethan's side. One guard took his arm. Ethan did not resist. The second guard reached for Lucy. Ethan moved between them so quickly the man stepped back. No one understood what they had seen. One moment Ethan's arm had been restrained. The next, his daughter stood behind him and both guards had stopped advancing. No punch, no threat. Only a position changed with the efficiency of someone who had spent years placing his body between danger and other people. The movement pulled open his collar. A small metal slipped into view. Captain Robert Kane saw it from across the room. The metal carried a blue ribbon, faded almost gray. At its center was the silver outline of a wave beneath a rescue blade. Only 17 people had ever received it. Robert knew because one of those medals had been awarded after the night he nearly died. He moved toward Ethan. With every step, another detail returned. The scar crossing the forearm, the calm eyes, the habit of standing slightly angled, never exposing the person behind him. Robert had spent 15 years remembering the diver who entered a sinking cargo ship after official rescue operations ended. He remembered freezing water around his chest. He remembered steel trapping both legs. He remembered a beam of light moving through darkness. Then a hand. That hand had belonged to Commander Ethan Cole, the leader of North Atlantic Response Unit 4, the last man to leave the wreck of the Maribel. Robert stopped in front of him. Ethan recognized him after several seconds. The young officer from the lower compartment had become older, broader, and silver-haired, but the eyes were the same. Robert lowered his head. The captain's respect traveled through the ballroom faster than any announcement. He explained who Ethan was, a decorated rescue commander, a saturation diver, an emergency engineer who had designed maritime survival systems now installed on ships throughout the world. The man who had saved Robert and 3 others from a vessel already listed as unrecoverable. Guests began raising phones. Isabella looked toward Marcus. Marcus no longer smiled. Ethan appeared unmoved by the recognition. His attention had returned to the faint vibration beneath the floor. He felt it before anyone else. An uneven rhythm. A hesitation in the starboard turbine. Then the lights dimmed. The first engine failed. The Celestia's bridge received 19 alarms in 12 seconds. Cooling pressure collapsed across the starboard engine. The automatic system attempted to transfer load to port. The remaining engine absorbed more power than its valves could tolerate. Temperature rose. Robert reached the bridge, while crew members struggled to understand conflicting sensor readings. Several displays still showed normal pressure. Ethan knew why. Someone had programmed the sensors to report adjusted values during the launch voyage. The bridge had not merely been denied information. It had been shown a manufactured reality. The storm struck from the northwest. Wind pushed the ship toward a reef marked on navigation charts as Widow's Teeth. Under normal power, the Celestia could have turned away. With one engine gone and the other failing, the ship's size became a liability. More than 2,000 lives drifted inside a beautiful object unable to control its direction. Robert ordered passengers to emergency stations. The announcement was delayed because Isabella's communications director feared panic. Robert made the announcement himself. The ballroom changed instantly. Wealth disappeared as a useful identity. Investors, celebrities, and executives became passengers searching for life jackets. Isabella stood near the stage while her company's perfect evening collapsed around her. Marcus moved quietly toward a private stairwell. Ethan noticed. He told Robert that someone needed to secure Marcus before he reached the executive launch. Isabella heard him and turned toward her financial officer. For the first time, she saw the small waterproof case in his hand. The case contained cash, identification documents, and a satellite phone. Marcus had prepared to leave. He had known failure was possible. That truth wounded Isabella differently than the storm. She had spent years believing loyalty could be purchased. Marcus had allowed her to believe the ship was safe because her obsession with the launch protected his fraud. He had not betrayed a good leader. He had used a dangerous one. Security stopped him before he reached the launch deck. By then, Ethan was already moving below. Heat met him at the engine room door. The compartment alarm had failed after a power surge. Emergency lights flashed through smoke. Water spread across the lower floor as a cooling line discharged near the aft bulkhead. Engineers shouted over the noise. Ethan did not. He studied the system. The failed valves had trapped pressure inside the starboard loop. The port engine was pulling from the same compromised circulation line. Standard procedure required shutting down both turbines. That would save the engines. It would sacrifice control of the ship. The reef was less than 20 minutes away. Ethan proposed using the fire suppression pumps as a temporary cooling source. The system had never been designed for that pressure. If the connection failed, the engine room would flood with superheated water. If they did nothing, the Celestia would strike rock broadside. A young engineer named Caleb volunteered to enter the lower circulation bay. Ethan refused. Caleb knew the ship. Ethan knew this kind of failure. He descended alone. The passage narrowed near the valves. Metal vibrated around him. Steam turned every light into a white blur. For a moment, another storm returned. The year Anna died. The rescue call that kept Ethan at sea during the first night of her final hospitalization. He had arrived 12 hours later. She was unconscious. He never heard her voice again. After the funeral, Ethan resigned from rescue service. People believed trauma drove him away. The truth was more ordinary and more painful. He had saved strangers because he knew how. He had failed to be beside the person who needed him because he kept believing there would be more time. Since then, every job ended before Lucy's school day. Every phone remained on during the night. Every promise to return carried the weight of one promise already broken. Now Lucy waited several decks above him. The ocean pressed against the hull. The broken wooden whale rested in his pocket. Ethan reached the main bypass valve. It would not turn. Corrosion locked the internal assembly. A tool slipped from his hand and vanished into the water. He tried again. Nothing. Above him, the remaining engine temperature crossed its final limit. Automatic shutdown began counting backward. Ethan placed both hands on the wheel. Pain traveled through an old injury in his shoulder. He remembered holding the steel hatch of the Maribel while Robert crawled through a freezing water. He remembered Anna telling him that strength was not the same as never stopping. Sometimes strength was knowing what was worth returning to. Ethan forced the valve. Metal screamed. The wheel moved 1 inch, then another. The bypass opened. Fire suppression water entered the cooling loop. Pressure rose violently. A pipe connection ruptured across the bay. Caleb, who had followed farther than ordered, was struck by the escaping line and thrown behind a support frame. The compartment began filling. Ethan could close the watertight door and preserve the temporary cooling system. Caleb would remain on the wrong side. The bridge radio ordered him to evacuate. Ethan looked at the engineer struggling beneath the steel frame. 15 years earlier, he had ignored a similar order. That decision saved Robert Kane. Some choices did not become easier with repetition. They simply revealed who a person still was. Ethan crossed the flooding bay. He lifted the support enough for Caleb to pull one leg free. The engine shutdown reached 5 seconds. Ethan dragged him toward the access ladder. 4. 3. The temporary pump engaged. 2. Cooling pressure stabilized. 1. The shutdown stopped. The port engine remained online. On the bridge, the turbine responded. Robert ordered full rudder. The Celestia's bow began moving, at first slowly, too slowly. The reef appeared through rain as a line of white water breaking over black stone. Passengers saw it from the upper decks. Some prayed, some held strangers, some finally understood that money had never been protection from nature. The ship turned another degree, then another. The port engine temperature remained near failure, but it held. The reef passed along the starboard side, close enough for the passengers to hear water exploding against rock. The Celestia entered deeper water. Robert did not celebrate. He waited for Ethan's voice on the radio. Nothing came. Then the engine room door opened. Caleb emerged first, supported by two technicians. Ethan followed. His uniform was soaked. One hand was burned. Blood ran from a cut near his hairline. But he was walking. When he reached the bridge, Lucy was waiting. She had refused to remain in the passenger assembly room after learning where her father had gone. No one could convince her that rules mattered more than the door he would return through. She ran to him. Ethan lowered himself despite the pain. Lucy wrapped both arms around his neck. The room looked away. Some moments felt too private even when everyone needed to witness them. Ethan reached into his pocket. The wooden whale was wet, still broken. He placed it in Lucy's hands. She looked at the missing fin, then at him. The whale could be repaired. Her father had returned. That was enough. The Celestia reached port under escort the following afternoon. Police boarded before passengers disembarked. Marcus Shaw and his brother Martin were arrested. Investigators recovered deleted maintenance reports, false supplier records, and evidence showing that refurbished equipment had been installed throughout the cooling system. The shell company that sold the parts belonged to Marcus through a chain of private accounts. He had stolen millions. But the fraud survived because Vale Oceanic rewarded silence. Engineers who objected were removed. Managers who approved impossible deadlines were promoted. Safety reports were treated as threats to investor confidence. Isabella had never selected the failed valve. She had built the system that made the valve possible. The board removed her as CEO 3 days later. Videos of the ballroom confrontation spread before the ship reached harbor. The most viewed clip did not show the engine failure. It showed Lucy watching Isabella step on the wooden whale. Another showed Robert lowering his head before Ethan. A third showed Ethan entering the engine room door after the woman who humiliated him asked whether he could save her ship. Reporters gathered outside Ethan's home. He gave no interviews. Vale Oceanic offered compensation, a permanent executive position, and a public ceremony. He rejected all three. Instead, he submitted a list of conditions through an attorney. Every maritime worker employed by Vale Oceanic would receive independent authority to halt a voyage when safety was at risk. All technical reports would be stored outside executive control. Crew members working extended voyages would receive family care support, and no employee's child would be treated as an embarrassment when childcare failed. The board accepted, not from kindness, from fear. Sometimes justice began for imperfect reasons. It still mattered where it led. 6 months later, Isabella came to Ethan's repair yard. Winter wind moved through the harbor. Fishing boats knocked gently against their moorings. She arrived without a driver, without assistance, without the white coat that once appeared in every business photograph. In her hands was a small wooden box. Ethan continued repairing an outboard motor until she reached the doorway. He did not ask why she had come. Isabella placed the box on the workbench. Inside was Lucy's wooden whale. The broken fin had been restored using a lighter piece of cedar. The repair line remained visible. Isabella could have hidden it beneath paint. She had chosen not to. Damage did not disappear because someone became ashamed of causing it. Ethan examined the repair. It was careful. Lucy entered from the office carrying a schoolbook. She stopped when she saw Isabella. The former CEO lowered herself slightly, though not enough to make the gesture theatrical. She apologized. The words were brief, no explanation about pressure, no defense involving Marcus, no claim that she had been misled. She admitted that she had looked at Lucy and seen only a problem affecting her event. She admitted that she had ignored Ethan's warnings because she cared more about appearing successful than keeping people safe. She admitted that an apology could not return the moment she had taken from a child. Lucy listened. Then she touched the lighter piece of wood. She said the whale looked different. Isabella agreed. Lucy considered it for several seconds. Different was not the same as ruined. She took the whale. Ethan did not offer forgiveness. He asked what Isabella had done since leaving Vale Oceanic. She had joined the Independent Compensation Board for workers harmed by the company's safety failures. She received no salary. Her name appeared on no building. She spent most days listening to engineers she once would have interrupted. It was not redemption. It was evidence that she understood the work had begun. Ethan nodded once. That was all she received. It was more than she expected. 1 year after the storm, the Anna Cole Maritime Safety Center opened beside the harbor. It contained technical classrooms, a rescue pool, childcare rooms, and a simulation deck where young engineers learned how small mechanical failures became disasters when powerful people refused to listen. Ethan taught 3 days each week. He declined the director's office and chose a workshop overlooking the water. Captain Robert Kane joined the training program after retiring from Vale Oceanic. Caleb, the engineer rescued from the flooding compartment, became the center's first full-time instructor. Lucy spent afternoons doing homework in the childcare room and correcting adults whenever they described her wooden whale as damaged. It had been repaired. That was different. During the opening ceremony, reporters asked Ethan why he had not revealed his former identity when Isabella humiliated him. Ethan looked toward the workers entering the center with their children. Had he shown the medal earlier, Isabella might have respected him. Only him. The medal would not have protected the next mechanic, the next cleaner, the next frightened child whose parent held no famous title. Respect that arrived only after discovering power was not respect. It was calculation. The Celestia eventually returned to sea after every major system was rebuilt. Its launch emblem was removed from the training center. In its place stood a simple steel plaque containing one sentence: "A warning ignored does not become less true." On the anniversary of the storm, Robert and Lucy stood near the harbor, watching the repaired ship leave port. Passengers gathered along its decks. This time, the crew's families were invited to the departure ceremony. Lucy held the wooden whale against the railing. Robert asked whether she still feared storms. She thought about the question. The fear remained, but fear no longer meant she believed everyone she loved would disappear. Ethan stepped out of the workshop carrying 2 life jackets. Lucy saw him and ran across the pier. She called for him. He turned immediately. He always did. People at the center knew Ethan as Commander Cole. Sailors knew him as the man who saved the Celestia. Robert knew him as the diver who entered a sinking ship when every other rescuer had been ordered home. But Lucy knew the title none of them could give him. The title that mattered because it was earned again every morning. Dad. Ethan fastened her life jacket and checked the strap beneath her chin. The same slow movement he had made in the ballroom before entering the storm. Then they boarded a small training boat together. The harbor opened ahead of them. Lucy placed the repaired whale near the bow. Ethan started the engine. It answered with a clean, steady sound. He listened for several seconds. Old habits. Then he guided the boat away from the pier. Behind them stood a center built because someone had finally listened. Ahead of them waited open water. The ocean had not become kinder. The world had not become fair. Machines would still fail. Powerful people would still mistake silence for agreement. And storms would still arrive before anyone felt ready. But Lucy sat beside her father beneath the morning light. The whale rested safely between them. And this time, when they moved toward the sea, neither of them was running from the past. They were teaching themselves how to return from it.